I work for a company that isn't supposed to exist, digging a hole no one is supposed to know about, funded by people no one will ever name. On paper, my employer is a deep resource exploration venture, incorporated in 3 countries, and buried under a stack of shell corporations and glossy sustainability reports. The public website shows stock photos of smiling engineers, wind turbines at sunset, and friendly slogans about powering the green future. What we actually do is simple. When someone very rich or very powerful wants to know what lies 3 kilometers under a specific patch of ground, we are the ones who dig until we find out. We don't ask why. We don't ask for whom. We just ask how deep, how fast, and how quietly. This site was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was a faded cluster of buildings with a gas station that still had manual pumps. Officially, our operation here was an experimental mine in a geologically stable region, searching for rare metals for high-end batteries. Unofficially, the internal briefing called it something else: investigation of a deep geothermal anomaly. Translation: somebody's instruments had noticed something underground that shouldn't be there. The camp itself was a familiar kind of ugly. Shipping containers stacked into offices and dorms. Floodlights on tall poles turning the night into a harsh white bubble. A perimeter fence more to keep us in than anyone else out. In the center of it all, like the plug of some giant drain, was the main shaft, a circular pit ringed by steel, winches and cranes, dropping straight down into the earth. By the time this story begins, we were already past 2.5 kilometers. I'm a mining engineer. At least that's what my degree says. In practice, my job is to stare at numbers and try to make sure none of them turn into an obituary. I watch pressure, temperature, vibration. I decide when to reinforce the shaft and when to keep going. I tell the drillers when they can push and when they need to back off, and they decide whether they're going to listen to me. Down in the shaft, work goes on 24 hours a day. Platforms ring the wall at intervals, each level a tangle of scaffolding, cables, and equipment. The deeper you go, the more the air tastes like metal and old heat. At surface, you hear diesel engines and shouted conversations. At 2,000 meters down, you hear your own breath in your ears and the distant grind of machinery echoing off the rock. We knew we were getting close to something before we saw it. The rock started to change. First, it was just a shift in the drill feedback. The bit stopped biting the way it should. The torque readings spiked without explanation. Samples that came up in the slurry trays looked wrong. Not in composition. That still showed as mostly what we expected, but in texture. Veins of stone that looked like they had been melted and refrozen, smooth in ways natural rock usually isn't. Old magma flow, one of the geologists suggested, squinting at a core segment in the lab trailer. Marta, our lead, shook her head. Not at this depth, not in this formation, she said. And not that clean. It's like something cut through here and left a glassy scar. That phrase stuck with me. We kept going. The orders from the top, higher than my boss, higher than the site manager, higher than anyone whose name I'd seen on a company org chart, were simple. No lateral tunnels, no branching drifts. A straight shaft, down and down, widening only when we needed to install another staging platform. No exploration. No sampling beyond what was necessary to keep the drill from eating itself. Normally, the accountants scream when you dig without a clear ore body in mind. This time, the money flowed without complaint. New tools appeared overnight. Replacement parts arrived before we requested them. Someone wanted to reach that anomaly very badly. I was on the night rotation the day we broke through. It was just after 3 in the morning. Up top, the camp was mostly quiet. A few smokers clustered outside the mess tent. The hum of generators, the constant distant whine rising from the shaft. The control room, a converted container with too many screens for its own good, glowed blue around me. On the main monitor, the live feed from the drilling head showed what it always did. Rock, rock, more rock. The image was grainy, lit by a ring of industrial LEDs, the bit chewing into stone like a metal animal. Data panels on the side scrolled. Depth, torque, bit temperature, penetration rate. Everything looked normal until it didn't. The penetration rate jumped. For hours, it had been steady, slow progress through hard rock. Now suddenly the bit was sinking faster, like it had hit something softer. Drill crew, control, I said into the radio. I'm seeing a change in resistance. Confirm what you've got down there. There was a crackle and then a voice, muffled by depth and static. Yeah, we feel it, the driller said. Feels like we just broke through crust into… I don't know. It's not empty, but it's not this stuff either. You want us to pull back? I stared at the numbers. Torque had dropped, not spiked. Bit temperature was rising, but within tolerances. The vibration signature had changed in a way I didn't like, but I couldn't yet say why. Hold current speed. Don't push it, but don't stop yet. I want a little more data. Copy that. On the video feed, the rock in front of the bit began to change color. It went from the familiar gray-brown to something darker, almost black. The surface looked smoother, as if the bit were shaving against glass instead of grinding rock. The temperature readout ticked higher. Red crept into the little bar on the side of the screen. Control, this is drill. The voice came back, a little tenser. We're getting heat warnings down here, and the smell is… weird. What kind of weird? I asked. Like hot metal and sulfur? And something else. Like someone left a barbecue going in a cave. Sulfur wasn't unusual in deep rock. The something else was. Okay, I said. I want you to pull back 5 meters. We're going to pause and… The image flared white. Everyone in that control room flinched at once. The camera feed went to static, then black. A shrill alarm stabbed the air. Camera lost, someone said unnecessarily. The temperature bar had slammed all the way into critical, then dropped to 0 as the sensor cut out. The torque reading flatlined. Vibration went off the charts for a half-second, then fell to nothing. Drill crew, talk to me, I snapped. No answer, just static. My stomach tightened. Drill crew, respond, I repeated louder. This is control. What's your status? After a few heartbeats that felt much longer, the driller's voice came back, breathless. We're okay, he said. Bit stopped. Systems tripped. We've got flashing lights down here and a smell like burned wiring, but nobody's hurt. Why didn't you answer the first time? I asked. There was a pause. We were listening, he said softly. To what? I was about to ask when I heard it too. It came through the speakers, but not from any of the usual channels. A low sound at the edge of hearing, like something large exhaling through narrow spaces. Then, beneath it, something else. Voices. Not clear enough to understand, not loud enough to be sure I wasn't imagining them, but definitely there. Hear that? One of the techs beside me whispered. I muted the external feed. The room went too quiet, like I'd put a pillow over a screaming mouth. Okay, I said. We're going to shut down the drill for now. Lock it out, tag it. No one touches that control panel until I say so. Understood? There was a chorus of acknowledgments from the crew below. I grabbed a hard hat, a respirator, and the nearest working flashlight. Where are you going? Marta asked from the doorway. Down, I said. She frowned. We should wait for the day shift. Or for management. Or for someone with more insurance. They'll want eyes on it, I said. And I'm awake. She looked at me, saw that arguing wouldn't help, and sighed. At least take a gas meter, she said, tossing me a handheld sensor. If that smell is what I think it is, you don't want to be the first one to find out the hard way. The elevator cage into the shaft was just big enough for 4 people, but I rode it alone. As it descended, the camp lights above shrank to a small square. The air grew hotter and wetter with each level we passed. The hum of machinery vibrated the metal under my boots. By the time we reached the lowest platform, over 2.5 kilometers down, the air tasted like the inside of a hot battery. The drill rig loomed in front of me, a massive column of steel and cables anchored to the platform. The crew, 3 men and 1 woman, stood back from the control console, faces shiny with sweat and something else. Their eyes were wider than they should have been. Talk, I said. What did you feel? The lead driller, a guy named Russo, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. It was fine, he said. Just like the graphs. Hard rock, steady advance. Then the bit just slid, like it stopped biting. The whole rig shuddered, and the heat spiked. Then the alarms went off. Everything went dark for a second, and? I prompted. And it got quiet, he said. Too quiet. Like the rock wasn't there anymore. And there was… something. Like… singing. But not. I thought it was just the motors, but when they cut, it was still there. For a second. The others nodded, not making eye contact. I walked to the edge of the platform and looked out. The shaft dropped away below us, ringed by concrete and steel. The drill string disappeared into the darkness. A faint orange glow flickered far below, not from our lights. I pointed the flashlight down. The beam reached only so far, swallowed faster than it should have been by the heat shimmer. "Gas readings?" I asked, checking the meter in my hand. "Nothing off normal," Marta's voice came through the radio. "CO2 a little high, but that's the ventilation lagging. No methane, no hydrogen sulfide. Oxygen still good." "Copy," I said. I clipped the meter to my vest, tightened the straps on my respirator, and started down the ladder to the next staging ring. "You shouldn't go alone," Russo called after me. "Then come with me," I said without looking up. He hesitated, then joined me. We climbed down one level, then another. The heat hit harder the deeper we went. Sweat soaked my shirt. Metal burned through my gloves if I lingered on a rung too long. At the last platform, the world narrowed to orange and black. The glow I'd seen from above came from somewhere below the end of the drill string. The rock at the bottom of the shaft wasn't rock anymore. It was something else. We stepped to the edge and looked down. There, maybe 10 meters below the platform, our shaft opened into a void. The walls, which had been rough concrete and stone, now ended in a jagged lip. Beyond that, the light came from a slow, rolling movement. It took a second for my brain to register what I was looking at. A river of molten rock, not wide but deep, flowing through the darkness. "Jesus," Russo breathed. The beam of my flashlight cut across it, dancing over viscous orange and red. The surface cracked and reformed, glowing brighter where cooler crusts sank and fresh heat rose. The flow moved steadily from left to right, disappearing into black on one side and emerging from black on the other. But it wasn't the lava that froze my heart. It was what lay above it. Set into the far wall of the void, spanning from platform level down to just above the lava flow, was a structure. It might once have been a door. Now it was a suggestion of one. 2 vertical slabs of stone joined by a lintel, all of it carved from some impossible dark rock that drank the light. The edges were too straight, too deliberate, to be natural. The surface was worn, cracked, and scorched, but I could still make out faint lines that might have been carvings, circles, spirals, shapes that hurt to look at directly. In the middle, where a seam would be on any normal door, there was a narrow gap. From that gap, the lava flowed. It didn't bubble up from some magma chamber below. It poured out of that narrow mouth and dropped, like water from a spout, into the river below, which carried it away into darkness. The gas meter on my vest chirped, then went silent. The display flashed nonsense. "Control, this is Cole," I said into the radio, voice strangely calm. "We have found your anomaly," Marta answered. "What do you see?" I stared at the impossible doorway feeding a river of fire in the depths of the earth. "Take a guess," I said. Russo made the sign of the cross without thinking about it. I'm not sure he even realized his hand had moved. We stood there in the heat and the glow, and listened. The sound wasn't just lava. Lava has a roar, a rolling crackle. This had that, yes, but under it and behind it, there were others. Metal clinking, something like chains being dragged over stone. Snatches of sound that might have been voices, too many and too far to separate, rising and falling like breath. My skin prickled under my clothes. Marta's voice came again, tinny in my ear. "Cole, what are you hearing?" "Nothing you want on a memo," I said. We didn't stay long. Even if fear hadn't driven us back up, the heat would have. The metal of the platform was already warming under our boots, in ways that were not compatible with human survival. Back in the control room, the video feed from the broken drill camera still showed black. New orders were waiting in my inbox. "All drilling operations are to cease immediately. Shaft to be secured. No further descent without express authorization from ownership." Ownership. Not management, not the board. Ownership. I'd never seen that word on a directive before. 2 hours later, a plane landed at the little airstrip that served the site. A black helicopter followed. Men in suits got out, which was strange enough. Men in black clerical shirts got out with them, which was stranger. By noon, everyone on site knew the rumors. The company had been sold overnight. A new holding company in Europe had acquired controlling interest. The Vatican was involved. By sunset, they weren't rumors anymore. We were assembled in the mess hall. Engineers, drillers, cooks, everyone who'd seen or even heard about what we'd found. A man in a suit we'd never seen before stood at the front, flanked by two other men in what I can only describe as modern armor. Ballistic vests, reinforced black clothing, sidearms. Over their vests, pinned with an unsettling mixture of pride and practicality, were small silver crosses. Behind them stood a priest in a simple black cassock. No ornament, no smile. "Good evening," the man in the suit said. "My name isn't important. What matters is that from today forward, this operation is under new ownership and new management." He didn't say who. He didn't have to. The caller beside him said it for him. "You have all signed non-disclosure agreements," he went on. "Those agreements still apply. In fact, they apply even more now. What you saw today at the bottom of that shaft does not leave this site. It does not go on social media. It does not go in emails to your families. If anyone here feels an irresistible urge to share it, consider that urge a security breach and come to us instead." Murmurs rolled through the room. No one laughed. "We will be shutting down the mining operation," he said. "There will be severance packages and transfers for most of you. A small number of personnel will be asked to stay on for a different kind of work." His eyes swept the room. They paused on me for a fraction of a second. My stomach dropped. "Some of you," the priest added, stepping forward, "have walked halls no human was meant to walk. You have seen something old. You have heard it. You know now that the stories were not all stories." He spoke English with a slight Italian accent, his voice quiet, but cutting through the murmur. "You have found a door," he said simply. "We intend to close it." Someone in the back couldn't help themselves. "What if it's already open?" they called out. The priest looked in their direction. "Then we will do what we can," he said. "If that is not enough, we will do what we must." The man in the suit took over again. "If your name is called," he said, "stay after. The rest of you will return to your quarters and await further instruction." He started reading from a list. Names. Some I barely knew. Some I knew too well. "Cole," he said. I stayed. When the hall had emptied, there were 20 of us. Engineers, a couple of drillers, a few mechanics, one medic. People who knew the shaft and the equipment better than anyone else in the world. "The Holy See has assumed control of this site," the man in the suit said. "They are assembling a response team, combat specialists, exorcists, structural experts. They will arrive within 48 hours. When they do, we will go back down into that shaft together." "Why?" someone asked. It might have been me. "To destroy what you found," the priest said. "And if it can't be destroyed?" I asked. He met my gaze. There was something tired and very hard in his eyes. "Then we will do what we can to make sure it remains hidden," he said. "Some things are not meant to be reached from this side." You'd think that would have been the moment I refused. That would have been logical. Nod, sign whatever paper they put in front of me, take the severance, and get as far away from that hole as possible. Instead, I heard my own voice say, "I'll help." The priest inclined his head, as if he'd expected nothing else. "Good," he said. "You know the road down. We will need a guide." I didn't correct him, because by then, it was starting to dawn on me that what we'd dug wasn't just a shaft. We had found a road. They arrived 2 days later, just as the weather turned, and the sky over the camp went from washed-out blue to a heavy metallic gray. By then, half the original crew was gone. The ones who stayed were either too curious, too stubborn, or too broke to walk away from a new contract with more zeros than cents. I told myself I stayed because someone needed to make sure the priests didn't get themselves killed trying to swing relics at structural problems. But if I was honest, that was only part of it. Once you've seen a door like that, it's hard to go back to pretending the world is just layers of rock and money. The convoy rolled in under cover of rain. 3 matte black trucks that looked military without any visible insignia. Behind them, a pair of buses with tinted windows. The last vehicle was a flatbed carrying something under a tarp that was either a small tank or a very angry generator. The camp gathered under the awnings and watched. Men and women got out of the trucks in gear that didn't belong to any army I recognized. Armored vests, helmets, weapons that looked like a mix of standard rifles and custom nightmares. Some of them wore patches with stylized keys or swords, symbols I'd only ever seen in conspiracy forums about Vatican black ops. The people from the buses were stranger, Some were in plainclothes that still managed to scream, "Not civilian." Others wore simple black clerical shirts with collars. A few, though, wore things I'd only seen in paintings. Cassocks with red piping, stoles embroidered with symbols, one or two in full white surplices over black robes, as if they'd stepped out of some old trial painting and forgotten to change. At the front of the group was the priest who'd spoken to us in the mess hall. He didn't look like much. Thin, average height, hair mostly gray. But people moved around him the way rock moves around a drill, with respect and a little fear. "Engineers," the man in the suit from before said, waving me and the others over. "This is Father Gabriel. He'll be coordinating the spiritual side of the operation. You'll coordinate the physical." "Cole," I said, offering my hand. He took it, his grip dry and firm. Up close, his eyes looked older than the rest of him. "You've been to the bottom of the shaft," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "I've seen the chamber, the river, the door." He nodded once. "Describe it," he said. I did, briefly. The depth, the lava, the stone frame with the narrow gap and the worn carvings, the sounds. As I spoke, one of the other priests, a younger man with a shaved head and dark eyes, pulled a worn notebook from a satchel and began to sketch. By the time I finished, the page showed something uncomfortably close to what I remembered. He flipped back through the book, comparing. I caught glimpses of other drawings, an arch in a different kind of rock, a gate half buried in sand, a circle of standing stones. Similar, not identical. Father Gabriel glanced at his notes, then back at me. "Any sign of structural weakness around it?" he asked. "Not in the rock we cut," I said. "Walls are holding. The problem isn't the geology. It's what's using it." He almost smiled. "We rarely get called in when the problem is just geology," he said. The plan, such as it was, came together over the next few hours. Step 1. Get the new teams down to visual range of the door safely. Step 2. Test a series of interventions, their word, not mine, designed to either collapse the doorway, neutralize whatever was coming through, or both. These ranged from the mundanely destructive, shaped charges placed in strategic points, to the theologically creative, a massive steel cross to be lowered into the flow, relics embedded, inscriptions etched along its length. Step 3. If all else failed, retreat and consider options that involved things like permanent quarantine, sacramental sealing, and, if necessary, controlled collapse of the shaft and surrounding strata. Controlled collapse, in this context, meant we bring the mountain down on it and hope that's enough rock between us and whatever that thing opens onto. My job was to make sure we could get people and equipment down there without the shaft giving up early, and to advise when their interventions would or wouldn't actually do what they thought they would. "You're our guide," Father Gabriel said. "You know the path, the machines, the angles. We know the other side." "I've only ever gone down with 4 people in a cage at a time," I said, looking at the sheer number of bodies and gear they were planning to move. "What you're planning needs more than that." He nodded. "We anticipated that," he said. "We brought our own." That was what the flatbed had been for. Under the tarp was a lift platform like nothing I'd seen before. A steel slab with high rails, big enough to hold 30 people and their equipment, suspended from 4 reinforced cables that could each have hauled a small house. It had its own independent power and control systems, redundant safety brakes, and more shock absorbers than a decent amusement park ride. "It's overkill for a mine," one of my colleagues muttered. "It's not for a mine," I said. They rigged it over the shaft with practiced efficiency. Our crane operators swore quietly under their breath, watching the precision with which the newcomers worked. By nightfall, we were ready for the first descent. Father Gabriel insisted on going on the initial run. So did the younger priest with the sketches. So did half a dozen armored specialists whose job descriptions no one put in writing. "You're not sending all the bosses down at once," I said, unable to help myself. "There's this thing called redundancy." "Thank you, engineer," the man in the suit said dryly. "We've considered it. Some of us have to see it with our own eyes." He looked at Father Gabriel. "And some of us consider that seeing it with their own eyes is the point." Gabriel didn't deny it. They loaded the platform. Priests, soldiers, 2 of our best drill techs to handle any mechanical issues, and me. Russo tried to push onto the lift too, but I shook my head. Watch the rig, I told him. If we come back up in pieces, someone has to know how to get the cage moving again. He grimaced, but stepped back. The lift shuddered as it took our weight, then began to descend. The walls of the shaft slid by, ring after ring of concrete and rock, lit by our mounted floods. The higher platforms fell away. The air grew hotter, thicker, more humid. Halfway down, one of the soldiers quietly took off his helmet and made the sign of the cross. No one commented. As we approached the lowest surviving platform, the glow from below grew brighter, painting the shaft in flickering orange. "Lights off," Father Gabriel said. The soldier at the control panel hesitated. "Sir?" "Turn the external floods off," Gabriel repeated. "We need to see how much light is coming from below without them." One by one, the artificial spotlights died, leaving only the natural or unnatural glow rising from the depths. It was brighter than before. "Did the flow increase?" the younger priest asked, leaning out just enough to peer down. "Hard to measure from up here, but it looks fuller." The river below rolled with slow, heavy motion. The lava's surface cracked and reformed, sending plumes of orange vapor into the void. The door looked the same and worse. In the flicker, its edges seemed to crawl. The carvings I'd only glimpsed before were clearer now. Not pictures I could recognize, but patterns that made my eyes want to skid away. The gap between the two slabs remained narrow, but the light inside it pulsed in a way that didn't match the flow below. It was like looking at lightning through a keyhole, slowed down and turned inward. The voices were louder too. Not actually louder. Sound doesn't travel that well in a hot open space, but more distinct, like someone had turned up the contrast. I could pick out tonal shifts now. Laughter. Weeping. Something that might have been singing if you'd never heard a human choir. The lift settled into its locking bracket at the lowest platform with a judder. "Stay behind the rail unless you have a reason to be closer," I said automatically, though no one needed reminding. We disembarked in relative order. The heat hit us like a wall. Even with respirators and cooled vests, sweat sprang up instantly. Father Gabriel walked with measured steps to the edge of the platform and looked down at the door. His face didn't change, but his hands tightened on the rail. "In nomine Patris," the younger priest whispered beside him. Gabriel gestured, and one of the soldiers passed him a small metal case. He opened it, revealing a crucifix, a vial of oil, and what looked like a folded piece of ancient parchment. He didn't move to use any of them yet. "We begin with observation," he said. "Then we act." Observation felt an awful lot like staring at something no one sane should stare at. I did what I knew. I checked the rock. Cracks, spalling, any sign that the walls were giving way. They weren't. For all its hellish decor, the void was stable. "Where would explosives do the most good?" the man in the suit asked quietly, coming up beside me. "Good is a big word," I said. "If you're trying to collapse the doorway, you'd want to place charges in the rock around the frame, not on it, undermining the supports. But given what's coming through that gap, I can't guarantee you'll get a normal response." "Assume we do," he said. I pointed to spots along the wall. "Here, here, and here," I said. "Blow those, and you drop enough rock to bury the frame. Maybe collapse the roof of this chamber. With enough force, you might even divert the lava flow." "And if we don't want to bury it yet?" Father Gabriel asked without turning. "Then you're back to your giant steel cross," I said. He nodded. We'd seen it on the surface before coming down. A massive I-beam structure, cross-shaped, with hollow arms and shaft filled with what I'd been told were relics, consecrated oil, and other things that weren't my business. The plan was to lower it into the lava just ahead of the door's outflow, anchoring it in such a way that the river of molten rock would have to part around it. In theory, one of the clerics had said in the briefing, that would create a kind of check valve, a choke point of sanctified matter. Anything trying to come through would have to pass by it. "In practice," I'd said, "you're putting a big piece of metal into magma. It's going to melt." "Not all metal melts the same way," the cleric had replied, and left it at that. On the platform, watching the door drip fire into the river below, the idea seemed even more insane. But insanity was, apparently, the flavor of the week. The first phase went almost according to plan. We anchored pulleys and winches to the platform supports. We rigged cables for the cross. We lowered it slowly, inch by inch, down the shaft. The heat was so intense that even through the insulated gloves, the steel of the railing felt uncomfortably warm. As the cross descended into view, its metal seemed to drink in the orange light. Words carved along its length caught the glow. Latin prayers, names of saints, symbols I didn't recognize. "Hold," Father Gabriel said when the cross's lower end hovered a meter above the lava. "Steady." The crew froze. The air hummed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the gap in the door flared. Light, not orange, not the natural red-white of molten rock, but something harsher, flashed within it, bright enough that everyone on the platform squinted or turned away. The river below surged, its surface heaving like something enormous had shifted its weight. Chains rattled in the unseen dark. And then they stepped out. I say, they. I don't know how many there were. Whether what we saw were complete beings or just pieces of something larger. Later, in the official debriefs, everyone's counts were different. Some swore they saw 3 figures. Some said 7. One of the soldiers insisted there were only ever 2, and the rest were shadows. What I know is this. Shapes moved in the gap and then onto the narrow ledge before the lava river, between the door and the drop. They were tall. Too tall. Wrong proportioned, as if someone had taken the idea of a human silhouette and stretched it in directions that didn't match any bone we know. Their skin, or what passed for it, looked black in the lava light and something else in the flash, like the surface of cooled magma that still glows within. They didn't have wings, no horns, no pitchforks. Any Sunday schooler movie demon would have felt insulted. But they had presence. The air on the platform changed, thickening, pressing in. My lungs had to work harder to pull anything in. The voices rose, not from mouths, but from around them, like the sound came from every part of the chamber at once. Os soldados levantaram as armas sem o menor comando. Fingers tightened on triggers. Hold fire, the suit snapped. Do not shoot unless they attempt to cross, Father Gabriel said, voice sharp. One of the shapes on the ledge tilted its head, studying us. Even from that distance, its attention felt like a weight. Something spoke. The words weren't in any language I knew. They weren't in any language at all. They were meaning, pushed like pressure through the bones. But my brain, desperate to file things somewhere, turned them into English anyway. You brought company. I realized my mouth was open. I didn't remember opening. We're here to close this, Father Gabriel said. And I knew then that if I listened only to the air, he was speaking Latin. The translation reached me the same way the other voice had. The shapes laughed. It sounded like metal bending. You dug too far. You opened the door. Now you want to slam it in our face. We were not the first, Gabriel said. No, the voice agreed. But you were eager. We felt you coming for a long time. While they traded theology at the edge of a volcano, my eyes went back to the steel cross. It hung above the lava, cables groaning. The heat shimmer distorted its outline, making the inscriptions crawl. Lower, Gabriel said without looking away from the ledge. The winch handlers obeyed. The bottom of the cross touched the lava. Every instinct I had screamed that it should melt instantly, sinking into the flow like a spoon into soup. Instead, for a long heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the lava around it flared, not brighter, but cleaner, as if some of the orange had burned off to white. A ring formed around the contact point, a corona of light that refused to match any temperature scale I knew. The shapes on the ledge recoiled a fraction. The voices shifted pitch, outrage creeping in. You bring your little symbols, your carved metal. You think that matters here? We know it matters here more than anywhere, Gabriel said. You know it too. That's why you're angry. The words crawling along the cross's shaft glowed now, each letter a tiny brand. The cables creaked dangerously. The cross wanted to twist, to spin, to be dragged under. Hold it steady, I called to the handlers. If it swings, it'll rip the mounts right out of the wall. One of the soldiers grunted, straining on the brake. It's pulling, he said through clenched teeth. Not down, sideways. Anchors, Gabriel said. Now. We'd planned for this, theory at least. Thick chains meant to tie the cross to drilled anchors in the rock at the sides of the chamber, creating a 3-point brace. The first team moved toward the edge of the platform with their gear, keeping low. That was when things went completely wrong. Up to that point, for all the nightmare framing, we'd been in control. We had a plan. We were executing it. The enemy, if that's what you want to call the things on the ledge, was reacting. The mountain decided it was tired of being a set. There was no rumble, no cinematic warning. One moment, the chamber walls held. The next, a section of ceiling above the door simply let go. A slab of rock the size of a house broke free and fell. It wasn't random. I will go to my grave believing that. If it had been random, it would have crushed the platform, the lift, the cross, the teams, or all of the above. It would have sheared cables and turned us into a red smear on the lowest level of the shaft. Instead, the rock dropped in a perfect arc and slammed directly into the stone frame of the door. For a second, the sound was everything. Rock on rock, lava hissing as ton after ton of stone plunged into it, the sharp crack of fracturing surfaces, the roar of displaced air. Debris flew, the platform shook, people screamed. "Down!" someone shouted, as if anyone needed to be told. I threw myself against the inner wall, covering my head with my arms. Hot dust washed over us, gritty and sulfurous. Something heavy clipped my shoulder and bounced away. Sparks rained as equipment scraped against the railing. When the worst of it passed, I opened my eyes. The air was a choking haze. The lava's glow was dimmer, broken by jagged chunks of new rock. The door was gone. Not just hidden, obliterated. The section of wall where it had been was now a chaotic tumble of boulders and fractured slabs, fused at the edges by instant heat. The gap that had poured lava was buried somewhere under meters of new stone. The shapes on the ledge were gone too. Whether they'd been crushed, driven back, or never there in any sense we'd understand, I couldn't tell. The river continued to move, of course. Lava finds a way. It flowed around the new obstruction, slower, forced into a narrower channel. "Status!" Father Gabriel shouted, voice hoarse. One by one, people called out. Bruised, bleeding, shaken, but alive. No one from our side had gone over the edge. No one had been crushed outright. A miracle, if you were inclined to call it that. "Ceiling," I croaked, forcing my legs to hold me as I stepped back to the rail. "Check the ceiling." We all looked up. The roof of the chamber was cracked where the slab had given way, but not catastrophically. The damage was focused on that one section, like a punch that had landed exactly where it meant to. "Is it stable?" the suit gasped, dust streaking his tie. "For now," I said. "If more lets go, it'll probably follow the same path, down onto that mess." "As long as it doesn't come back up," one of the soldiers muttered. Silence settled. Not absolute. Lava still moved, chains still clinked somewhere deep, but the voices were gone. Father Gabriel stared at the collapsed face of the chamber for a long time. "This was not our doing," he said softly. "No," I said. "Your charges aren't even down yet. This was something else." He turned to me. "What do you think?" he asked. I laughed once, short and humorless. "You're the one with the collar," I said. "You tell me." He didn't smile. "There are two possibilities," he said. Either we were about to do something very foolish and someone decided to stop us, or we were about to stop something from happening and something on the other side decided it wasn't time yet. "Divine intervention, or hell's self-preservation," I said. "Yes," he said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," the younger priest put in quietly. We secured what equipment we could. We made the ascent in tense silence, everyone listening for the sound of more rock deciding it had had enough of gravity. On the surface, under a sky that had finally started to clear, the debrief lasted hours. Different departments wanted different narratives. The engineers wanted to call it a geological event triggered by our interference. The security people wanted to call it a structural failure that had conveniently eliminated the primary threat. The priests wanted to call it a sign. The Vatican's official line, as far as I later heard, was carefully worded. A dangerous anomaly had been identified, addressed, and safely obscured. My own report was more blunt. We dug. We found something that looked like a door at the bottom of a river of fire. Things on the other side noticed us. When we tried to block the door, the mountain itself collapsed in such a way that buried it completely without killing us. "I recommend no further attempts to access, expose, or destroy the structure," I wrote. "Some doors do not want to be closed or opened by human hands. If the goal is to keep the rest of us alive, the best course of action is to leave this one buried and pretend we never found it." I didn't expect that paragraph to survive the editing process. Surprisingly, it did. Even more surprisingly, a few months later, someone from higher up reached out with a follow-up. The site had been decommissioned. The shaft had been backfilled. Monitoring stations had been installed in a wide radius, disguised as ordinary seismographs. Just in case it moves again, the email said. I still work for the same company. On paper, anyway. We have other holes to dig, other anomalies to chase. There's always another rich person who wants to poke the deep. But sometimes, late at night, when I wake from dreams of lava and stone and voices laughing in the dark, I think about that collapse. About how precise it was. About how we, with all our plans and weapons and prayers and explosives, had gone down there convinced we were going to destroy hell like it was a faulty tunnel. And how, right before we could really try, the world itself reached down and pulled a curtain of rock between us and the door. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was both. All I know is this. We talk a lot, in this business, about opening paths. New roads, new tunnels, new ways to move people and power. It's what got us paid, and what almost got us killed. But down there, in that impossible chamber, I learned something I can't unlearn. Not every road we find is meant to be traveled. Not every door we uncover is meant to be opened or closed by us. And sometimes the kindest thing the universe can do is take the choice out of our hands and bury the way to hell under a few million tons of rock. So the only road we have to walk is the one that leads away.